So I'm Saskia. I'm a workplace consultant with 360 Workplace. And on the stage here I have with me Frankie, the CEO of Air Rated, and Andrew, who is one of our senior designers at Area, who is 360's sister company. Now, we are here today as workplace interior specialists. That's our expertise is in workplace experience, change management, that sort of thing. We're not really here as building engineers or services specialists or anything. So please bear that in mind when you ask us questions later. Now, just a quick show of hands, who here would consider themselves to work within the construction industry? You know, in one way or another, it all eventually leads up into it. Cool, okay, that's a good show of hands. So I think even though we've got lots of different skill sets within the room, and there's lots of different demographics and companies and professions, we all have this thing in common. We all work, for the most part, in the same industry. And I think, you know, listening to all the talks that have happened so far this morning, I'd push that further and say that actually we all share a common mission. We all share a common why we do our jobs. And I believe that is to create healthier and happier environments for people. I know that that's why I get out of bed every day, is to create healthier and happier environments for my clients' employees. Now, this is when I would have clicked on to the next slide, which has that Winston Churchill quote on it. You know, the one that says, "We shape our buildings, thereafter we shape us." Has everyone heard that quote before? I think it's probably one of the most overused quotes in any sort of construction industry gathering. Oh, yay! Ta-da! Fantastic. So I think about these words on a daily basis. So 360 Workplace and Area, we work with the tenants and the occupants of buildings. We work with the employees to help understand what their workplace needs are, their workplace requirements are. So I have seen firsthand how these words ring true. I have seen how people who work in poorly designed buildings with awful environmental factors, I've seen how that has a negative impact on their mental, physical, and social health. So I'll just give you a quick example of this. We had a client in Paris, and they moved from building A to building B. Now, building A, albeit a beautiful old Parisian townhouse, had teeny tiny windows, zero accessibility. Nobody in a wheelchair could ever dream to work in that building. You couldn't control the temperature. It was always too hot. It was always too cold. The acoustics were awful. You get the picture. They moved from that building into building B, which was a redevelopment of an existing space. And I will just caveat this by saying that the landlord who redeveloped this also then occupied the building, which I think helped with a lot of decisions into how this building became so wonderful. And this building, basically the whole kind of brief of the redevelopment of this building was that it has to be a space for people. So they were able to retain these gorgeous, huge windows. They had terraces on every single floor. There was a wonderful strip of trees along the outside, so everywhere you looked, you could just see greenery. I don't know what they did to the HVAC system because that's not my area of expertise, but they did something to it that made it a wonderful place to work. They got all of the certifications under the sun. It was the first Fitwel certified building in France, and they moved in. Now, we don't have the quantitative data for the impact of this yet. That survey is due in December, but we were with them this week over in the new office, and they just cannot believe that they get to work in such a wonderful space. And it's just amazing seeing them go from building A, where they were all a bit, disjointed and they weren't really together, moving into building B, where the impact is just wonderful. They are so happy and they are much more productive, and it's just great. Now, the reason why I think building B was such a success is because all of the stakeholders involved in the redevelopment of that building were all bought into this idea of this people-first building, designing the building for people. So this is where this analogy of the human building comes into play. Now, David sort of stole my thunder earlier on this morning, so thank you. You were talking, and I was like, no, this is my bit for later. But when you think about our bodies as humans, however you believe we've been created, we have 11 different systems, 210 different bones, 600 different muscles, and 37.2 trillion cells, all existing in our bodies. And each of those different systems, muscles, bones, cells, they each have their own individual purpose. They have their own function. They're there to do a job. But they all have this common goal of trying to keep us alive. And if one of those systems starts to fail, then the body doesn't perform as it was intended to. Everything sort of goes a bit out of whack, and we're not at our 100%. We have to feed our bodies healthy foods. We have to exercise. We have to have regular checkups to make sure that we can live longer and healthier lives. And all of the same can be said for our buildings. Hopefully you saw where I was going. So it's really important that I'm just echoing kind of what's already been said on this stage today, but it's really important that there is this alignment between all of these different services and skills and professions that, in this room, in this hotel this morning, and all of today, we're all impacting and shaping buildings, which are ultimately impacting and shaping people's lives. So it's really important that we kind of, keep exploring how can we remain aligned in that goal. So at Area and 360, we really like to invest in our thought leadership, and we're really aware that, we are doing this, we are shaping people's lives. So we like to partner with different think tank organizations and different other industry professionals to research how we can actually help shape this and impact it. So I'm going to introduce you to our latest white paper, which is up on the board here. Now, this is live and available to download now from the Area LinkedIn page, so if you fancy having a look at it and having a read, please do. But this was obviously in partnership with Wonderful Air Rated, who are with us here today, about how can we actually, when we inherit the Cat A and we start to design the Cat B, what can we do to make sure that we don't mess it up, basically. So I'm going to now ask these guys a couple of questions. It's a bit of a panel Q&A, so please do use the Slido. I wonder if that poll will ever happen, but use the Slido if you have any other questions, but we do just have a couple of questions to ask Andrew and Frankie this morning. So, I might come and sit down with you, actually. Yes. Oh, thanks. Okay, so first things first, with this wonderful white paper, I think the first question I want to ask is just, how did this come about? What was the driver behind creating this document?
Yeah, so I'll go first. I think the driver, particularly for us, was so many of our clients are landlords, and they will design a space really well, but they will commonly deliver it to Cat A. It's then this kind of missing link between Cat A and Cat B spaces, where the landlord is driving this very sustainable, healthy approach sometimes with their Cat A space, and then there's a disconnect between the Cat A and Cat B. So the ductwork is all in, everything has been fit out M&E-wise, and then someone moves in, puts up partitions in spurious locations, kind of throws things together. Aesthetically, it looks nice, but actually, in practice, it's not going to deliver a particularly optimized space. So we wanted to connect the dots, because landlords are saying, well, we don't actually know what to say to prospective occupiers. We don't know how they should fit out their space. They also don't know what questions to ask fit-out companies. So it becomes very difficult because there's no kind of guidance to follow. So the purpose of this, at least for us, was to guide our clients into being able to empower their occupiers, existing, whether they're going to refurb the space or prospective, to have something to create a healthy space.
So without giving too much away from the paper, because we want everyone to go away and download it and read it, please, what should a client prioritize then? So what should be the priority for somebody during a fit-out project, not to hinder the air quality?
I guess the first thing is obviously assessing the building that you're going into and choosing, and how that obviously works for you as a company. We've kind of spoken as we've been going through this document, but things like the outdoor air quality within the area and how that affects the actual space you're looking for. You've got things like how the mechanical system works within that building, how new is it, what is the kind of quality of the air that it's producing and how that works for you, and how that aligns with the timeframes you're looking at and the kind of lease that you're looking at as well. There's a lot of factors, and then I guess linked into that is how you end up planning to use that space. So if you've got a certain way that the mechanical system is working, we worked on a project recently which was a fantastic landmark building in the centre of London. And it kind of ties in with what Frankie said, but there seems to be a big kind of push at the moment to develop and redesign Cat A spaces and to really kind of drive them forward, to try and sell that space obviously to prospective tenants. The issue with it comes in that when it is done, the design looks fantastic, but it's suited for people to come in and use that space as it is and not build any partitions. There's generally not enough fan coils or there are for the space as it is, but as soon as people start putting walls up, it's not really programmed for people to come in and use the space and divide it up. And the building we looked at recently, which looked fantastic, we ended up having to take, I think, a third to kind of 2/5 of the whole ceiling down, as well as the lighting, just to kind of rejig and get partitions up. They'd kind of built a lighting system which throughout the whole floor, which is about 13,000 square foot, only had 200 mil spaces between all the lighting systems. And that obviously wasn't really logical when you then come in and you need to build, 6, 7 meeting rooms, for example. So there's a lot of waste that goes into that, and I feel like there is that bigger connect that needs to be kind of placed on Cat A and Cat B.
Yeah, I think the priority is the people that are going to use the space. So the people being one, and then obviously the environment, because like I was saying, a lot of these landlords are saying, well, we want a sustainable building and one that's going to optimize our occupiers' health, well-being, productivity. The occupier comes in and then isn't necessarily on the same journey. So there is that disconnect. So the priority is, yes, the people in your space, yes, the environment, and it is just forging that collaboration with the landlord.
Sort of sounds like there's not really one easy win here when you're actually going through this process. I mean, like we've just described quite a lot that was going on there. So I think maybe perhaps the conclusion there is that actually there's not a one quick fix that you can do. I think it's lots of different considerations that need to be worked on as a collaborative process together, with all the different project teams. Okay. So you were kind of just talking about the sort of disconnect between you as a creative designer versus the M&E that's already existing in the building.
Yeah.
What are the other risks of that? Obviously, apart from money, what other risks do you find when you go into a poorly designed cafe space? You have to try and fit a Cat B into it.
I mean, there's obviously the complete amount of waste that we've got. The amount of plasterboard that we've put up in that brand new ceiling that we had to rip down is just crazy. I think especially when we look at the building industry, obviously being such a big, cause of the kind of emissions and carbon emissions throughout the world, there's something which really needs to be looked at there. And to my mind, it would be getting people involved. Not necessarily having a big divide in this Cat A and Cat B, but a way of linking those two together. And I think that would kind of contribute quite extensively to kind of reducing those kind of issues.
That's reminded me actually of another client that we're currently working with out towards kind of Winchester way, and they're having a brand new building built from the ground up. And we were able to get involved at an early enough stage that actually, the Cat A stuff was still being figured out, but we were able to come and start thinking about what the Cat B was going to look like. So we could start to help position the doors and things like that. So we were able to kind of get involved, and together we're hopefully going to be able to create what's going to be a more sustainable building that's, got this person, it's all about the people at the end, and we've been able to get involved much sooner. So due to complete next year or something. So fingers crossed that is going to work how we've all intended it to, but good point. Anything from you to add on that? The disconnect between creative and mechanical?
Yeah, I think the risk would probably be the design being built to a standard and then there not really being the follow-through on the maintenance and operational side of things. So it's delivered to a standard and a point, and then where is the handover and where do we join those dots? So when we were talking before about this kind of technology approach, so how do we integrate technology and people? That is the true way to deliver a space that's going to be maintained as healthy, having been delivered as healthy and sustainable. So the big risk is missing that.
As another reminded me of something else, I'm a WELL AP, so I'm involved in the international well building, emails and stuff. And one of the things that they mentioned was about how actually, the WELL standard is great and Fitwell is great, and all of those standards are great as how you design a building and you build it, but there's not a lot actually about then the maintenance and the follow through of it. And actually, you get your 3-year verification test done, but then actually, there needs to be more guidance around how we keep up that level and keep up that standard. I don't have the solution for it. I'm just going to check Slido. Any questions? Please do use the Slido. Right, thank you, Douglas. How do you better align landlord and occupants on this?
So we saw a case where a landlord asked us whether there was something they could write into a tenant agreement to say, as a landlord, we commit to delivering this space to a certain point. By signing this lease, you commit to, and it was something, their lawyers were only slightly bought into this, something about being mindful of best practice. And then we would feed in what best practice looks like, because you don't know what you don't know. So if you're a landlord saying, I'd like you to be mindful of best practice, go and find it yourself. They wanted to offer something to empower their occupiers, but they also wanted the occupier to buy into it. And I think using the contract was something that they could leverage, albeit they could have been stricter, but I think landlords at the moment they just want occupiers.
Yeah, like we were saying, all these empty buildings in London, just kind of fill them as much as you can.
Exactly. But then the risk with that is, well, if you've got an occupier who doesn't really care, and they're like, yeah, sure, I'll be mindful of it, but I'm not going to commit to anything solid. Actually, if you're a landlord and you want to reach net zero, you need people to be on the journey with you. So really, it's a trade-off between what people feel comfortable with signing versus what's truly meaningful to buy into.
Yeah, I think I was just saying from the kind of short-term fixed perspective as well. You've obviously, as you say, there's so many buildings which are sitting empty, and I think landlords are going to do the short-term solutions to try and get people in there when they need to be trying to think, obviously, a lot more long-term. Especially with the way everything is going with with ESG. If they do something quickly now to try and get people in, they'd be far better off doing, looking at the larger picture and making sure things are done to a higher standard, and then that will, by the time that first person's lease is up, they may need to come back in and re-look at other things.
There's just a second part of that question, which is just quite fun. With this whole human metaphor, what human system would a landlord be? And then what human system would the occupant be? I'm going to take the occupant one because the occupants are the people, and that's people have to be at the heart of our building. So the occupants would be the heart, but the landlords...
Well, I'm going to say it sort of depends what the occupier has control over. But the landlord would probably typically be the respiratory system and the nervous system, because they control the BMS, typically, and also they maintain anything above the ceiling, in a lot of cases. So I'm not saying it's typical for everywhere, but I think in most cases that would be it, unless anyone has any other thoughts.
Yeah, anyone else want to weigh in on that one, by all means?
Who knows the human body?
Yeah, we've got quite science on us quite quickly. Just conscious of time here as well, just a couple more questions coming up. So obviously, I think this is probably one that, again, we might not have the answer to, but how do you apply this approach to historic buildings? We know that, as Francis from Hawley was just saying, potentially not building any new buildings. So we have to make sure the buildings we have are up to scratch. How can we apply this approach to historic buildings? If anyone else wants to weigh in, by all means. This is a collective group solution, perhaps, not just the three of us, but, anything from you guys?
Well, I was going to say, I think we wrote this white paper with that in mind. So 80% of existing stock is going to need to meet requirements for net zero and also a healthier built environment. So I think it's determining the risks in a building. There are going to be things about that building that lend certain limitations to how you might refurbish it. And I think a lot of good stuff can be done with existing stock. If you were to almost gut it but keep the facade and that sort of thing, there are so many things that can be done. It just needs to be a joined-up approach. So this whole kind of interconnected world that was spoken about before, using technology, using a more sophisticated approach, rather than just saying, well, we've got this amount of air that we're just going to throw into the space at any given time. A more flexible approach, so using technology for a demand-driven system. To my knowledge, it's not that difficult to retrospectively fit technology. So a lot of stuff is plug and play, whether it comes to indoor air quality systems or occupancy monitoring systems. A lot of them can be done at Cat B, so they don't need all the kind of infrastructure beforehand. I think a lot of things can be done, a lot to do around materials as well.
Sure, which has been a big thing, I think. Just picking up on something that Frankie just mentioned there, we've just had our headquarters over in Windsor all redone. We moved into a wonderful new sort of building, but we didn't really do much, above the ceiling, as I call it. But we were able to install our air quality sensors. So through Aerator, we were able to get an air score through the Aerator team. So we didn't really do much to impact the HVAC system that was in that building, but we've been able to get, a nice certification, and we've been able to install these sensors. So at least we're aware of it. I think that's the first thing, is that we're not just turning a blind eye, but we're aware of it and we're monitoring it, and we have a plan in place, if the CO2 levels get too high or something. So, that's something that can be done to historic buildings, just to make us a bit more aware of what's happening.
Yeah, and what we've done, and this is purely from an air quality perspective, but in existing buildings, we've gone in at Cat A and monitored the air quality to say, this is the quality of air that's going to be delivered to you as an occupier coming into the building, so that you understand what the baseline is and you understand what you've got to work with. Because the current building sets the tone for what you can realistically achieve as an occupier coming into the space. So you know that that's what you've got to work with. You know what the kind of infrastructure looks like from floor plans and from ductwork drawings and that sort of thing. So you have a lot of information in existing buildings that you can use and then work with and draw in experts to say, this is what I've got. My aim is to create a healthy, productive environment that is also sustainable. Run with it. And then putting in systems like continuous indoor air quality monitoring, occupancy systems, can then help you on the operational and management side of things, as long as the data that's coming out is translated into actionable insights. So I'm being told that my CO2 level goes above 1,500, which is flagging as red. I've got 12 people in the boardroom. But what do I do now? So I think it's the translation of all of this stuff into the maintenance and ongoing operation of the building.
Behaviours as well, I think that's a key thing. Like that was one thing that we definitely wanted to look at in our new office was, you know, what behaviours can we do to make sure we are doing that? So like when there's the CO2 levels are too high in the boardroom, we just leave the door open for 15 minutes in between meetings rather than having back-to-back sessions, you know, those kinds of things that quite simple, it's quite easy, it's not that, you know, it's not that difficult to do. Thank you. There's a question here from David that's just disappeared off my screen. Everyone starts a project intending to incorporate best practice, but they often can't afford it and cost comes into it and it gets, you know, value engineered stuff out. So how can we stop that?
Go first because I'll start running.
We need more money.
Get more money in.
How do we do it? I guess we need to look back at the issues and finding it. I think without the issues and the causes of what we're doing being visible, people will forget about it. I think, you know, going back 10 years, it was always you'd speak to a new client and they would want to, you know, go down a sustainable route, and then they'd find out that, oh God, this is costing me more. Yeah, we'll scrap that. We'll just go back to the normal thing. But I think if the kind of negative impacts are there and visible to everyone, then hopefully that will kind of start to change people's perspectives and their way of thinking.
Which they kind of, I think they are probably a lot more now than they were 10 years ago. You know, everyone's a lot more awake to this. You know, we're all here because we know that this is true. So there's a point actually, I think it's part of the Fitwell standard is that you have to do this stakeholder collaboration process where you all sign up at the beginning and you all kind of agree to what the drivers are behind the project. Like that building I was telling you about in Paris where everyone who was involved in that project agreed to kind of uphold this standard. So it's, you know, kind of what you were saying about the agreement between the landlord and the occupant. And I mean, at the moment, that's kind of all I can think of. Again, if anyone else in the room wants to weigh in here, please do. But yeah, go on.
Yeah, I was going to say with. I'll go on.
Oh, she went.
Yeah, I think with this, I mean, what was the exact question again? So I'm answering one.
Everyone starts a project intending to incorporate best practice, but they can't afford it, and so value engineer stuff out. How do you stop that?
So I think it's two-pronged, and as a result of COVID, and I hate using that at the start of sentences, but as a result of COVID, there have been changes in regulation to say that more stringent best practice, or things that would be deemed best practice a couple of years ago, have now been adopted in regulation. So that's kind of the stick approach. I think with landlords, because us as individuals and occupiers on the whole have become more informed and are more aware of best practice, they will start to demand it. And I think that's where it needs to come from in order to create meaningful change. And in order to push the investment into best practice, there needs to be the demand from occupiers. And I think we're getting there. We've seen in a number of instances that, you know, it's one of the top 5 questions on prospective occupiers' list now is, what is the air quality in the space? What have you done to improve the ventilation in the space? And yes, that is a result of COVID, but also people are being they're more mindful because they understand that, we all understand that as individuals we can control what we eat, and sometimes we try and eat healthily, but at least we can control it. We can also control what we drink, but we can't really control what we breathe. So they want to know, they want that level of transparency. So I think that's going to become a demand that landlords in particular can't look away from. We can't unsee what we've seen. And I know that we're in our own echo chamber here, but there are a lot of other people out there who are saying the same thing, and those who are the decision makers looking at space.
A very abrupt stop here because we ran out of time. Sorry, I lost track in the middle there. There were some more really good questions linking onto that, but, you know, we're all aware of air quality, but actually with the energy crisis coming, is that still going to maintain, you know, what's going to outweigh each other? Does it have to be mutually exclusive? But we don't have any more time. If you have any other questions you'd like to ask us, please come and find us afterwards. Thank you so much. Hope you found this useful, insightful, I don't know, one of the above. Thank you. Thank you.